then bring on board and welcome Mr. Raman Aggarwal, Co-chairman of FIDC. Mr. Aggarwal, what were the key topic of discussions, we understand, between the RBI and NBFCs, and also which NBFCs were privy to this meeting? I mean, was it were the larger ones, were NBFCs of all sizes and categories included in this meeting?
Good morning. This meeting was basically called by RBI governor with the representative bodies. So on the NBFC front, since FIDC being the representative body was called, and then we had the representative body of the MFI segment in MFIN and Sadhan. And we believe later on in another session, no specific NBFCs, but the representative body and an FIDC as a representative body was called for this meeting. And so on the other part, the key points discussed were obviously from our side. What FIDC presented was obviously the need for a back-to-back moratorium, because it becomes a systemic issue once we are not offered a moratorium on our borrowing from banks and other institutions, while we have to offer moratorium to our borrowers. So that was the first point. And secondly, basically, what we sought was that, the kind of borrowers which we cater to, who are the absolute small bottom of the pyramid, small-time guys, whose cash flows have totally been disrupted. So it is very important that based on their needs and their requirements, their loan agreements need to be restructured. So a one-time restructuring should be allowed without degradation of asset quality and without any provisioning. There is already a RBI circular which allows one-time restructuring for MSMEs. So what we have suggested is that the scope may be expanded to include other borrowers without any additional provisioning. So that was the second part. And the third most important part is about the funding. And as you rightly said, the real pain comes for a large number of small and medium NBFCs. And we've seen that the banks are risk-averse. We saw the TLTRO2 window which RBI opened for banks. There was a very tepid response. So what we have suggested is that, if that funds could be routed to the financial institutions like SIDBI or NABARD, and they could take up this role of refinancing NBFCs on a longer term, maybe a 3 or 4 year lending. And similarly, some allocation could be done specifically for small and medium NBFCs, as was done in the TLTRO window. So these were the key points presented.
Okay, just want to talk on the moratorium bit. Any banks, has there been any agreement with respect to extension of the moratorium to these NBFCs?
See,
and what kind of NBFCs as well, to whom the moratorium extension could be granted?
See, it's not an issue to what kind of NBFCs. See, everybody, it's for all. Obviously, the point is that if you talk of the small and medium ones, they would need it immediately. For the big ones, the point is that, okay, they may be able to tide over these 3 months, but as we are hearing that there is a strong demand now for extending the moratorium because of the extension of the lockdown. And if this further extension is to happen, then of course even the big ones will feel the pain. So I think that is where one-time restructuring is a very, very critical point, I think, which should be allowed, which can take care, because the borrower needs, his cash flows will totally change henceforth. And depending on how much he can pay the EMI, his capacity to pay that EMI, and when can he repay, the loan agreements need to be restructured and rescheduled.
Right. Mr. Aggarwal, also just wanted to understand, once that NBFCs have now also started, they have been made, part of the revival plan of partial opening. What are the problems you're facing in the first few days? How do you expect next day to be better than the previous one?
There are obviously ground level challenges, opening up offices, while yes, it is needed to, kickstart things which had completely come to a standstill. However, in the lack of any public transport operating, it's a challenge to get staff. Whatever little staff we can to the office, it's a big challenge. And then, of course, we need to maintain, and still ground level niggling issues do arise with the police and other authorities. But I think those are just niggling issues which will settle as things go along. But more importantly, I think it's more on the transportation part, which is really a big challenge. And then we need to re-establish our contacts with all our borrowers and ensure that in whatever manner and how we can further assist them, how can we look towards our collections, all that needs to be. So it's kind of rebooting everything with the new restrictions in place.
Right. So also I just wanted to understand, what do you make of the mutual fund market for NBFC? So, post ILNFS, we all know that there have been issues and, a lot of companies are finding it very, very tough to raise funds. The situation now, what we are speaking to a lot of fund managers from the mutual fund industry say that the situation or the risk averseness is only increasing. How important a factor is that for growth?
See, it's always important, and let's understand, the entire financial market, their entities are all interlinked. See, when you say post-ILFS, because of the sentiment having gone wrong, there was a certain amount of risk aversion that crept in, and which we saw the same being manifested in the mutual fund investments also. Similarly, in the current scenario, after, we saw a scene where banks refused moratorium, and there was no clear-cut thing coming up in terms of the funding part. Even we saw TLTROs going through a very tepid response. Obviously, it did put and raise some question marks and doubts in the minds of investors. So I don't see anything really specific into it, but more a generic market sentiment which arose because of the prevailing developments. But as things go along and as we see things are moving in the right direction, since RBI has had this dialogue, we are also in touch with the Ministry of Finance. I think as we go along, these things should improve going forward.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Mr. Aggarwal. And yes, the hope is that the NBFC sector as well is able to revive with the